What if the stories of our ancestors held the key to understanding who we are today? On this episode of the Enlightened Life podcast, I'm honored to welcome award-winning journalist and author Roni Robbins. With nearly 4 decades of experience as a published writer, Roni has built an extraordinary career reporting for major publications such as the Huffington Post, Forbes, the New York Daily News, WebMD, and Healthline. She's interviewed some of the most influential figures of our time, from major CEOs and politicians to legendary personalities like Wolf Blitzer, Andy Gibb, Hank Aaron, and Usher. Her novel, Hands of Gold, is a deeply personal and riveting historical fiction inspired by her grandfather's remarkable journey of resilience and survival. The book has received widespread acclaim, winning the 2023 International Book Award for Multicultural Fiction and the Global Book Award's Gold Medal for Biographical Survival, among several other prestigious honors. Today we'll explore the powerful themes within Hands of Gold, the process of blending journalism with storytelling, and why preserving the stories of our ancestors is more important than ever. I'm your host, Scott Allen. Let's get started. Roni, welcome to the Enlightened Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much. You really have had an incredible career in journalism, writing for major publications like Forbes. How did your experience as a reporter shape your approach to writing this book, the historical fiction?
I used all my skills being a trained journalist to create this novel. I'm a storyteller by trade. That's my career. I was trained to be a storyteller, to check my facts, to do research, investigations, and back up everything that I say with facts. So I used all of that in this novel. So the interview part was cassette tapes that my grandfather left the family, and then I transcribed them. And I did a lot of research and looked up records and made sure that whatever I said was historically accurate, so that all my skills came into play for this novel.
That's wonderful. I want to go back just a little bit, though, because you've interviewed some really remarkable figures. Did any of these interviews leave a lasting impression on you or influence your storytelling in any way?
Not exactly. I mean, they're celebrities. I'd love to be a celebrity. I guess maybe it was an ego thing to write a book and get to the finish line. And I was determined to do it. So I would say that they probably didn't have an easy journey to get to where they are, and probably roughed it a little bit for a while until they got to the level that they did. You know, they might have had a hard life to begin with, and we don't even know what else they dealt with along the way of celebrity. So I don't know that they influenced me, but I think it's helpful that somebody who writes a book has that kind of a background, and that my publications trusted me to take on the stories of these celebrities, if that's what you mean. Any other stories that I've written, they all taught me how to be a better writer. Everything went into this level. And you go through training, you go through paying your dues in your industry. And this is sort of the cherry on top. This is where you take a chance in your career and try something different, a different branch. But you're at a point, for me, this is where I felt comfortable enough in the writing part of it to really be creative. And that, I think that confidence had to come from all of the steps from start to finish, from being trained to be a writer to practicing my skills at a high level.
What do you prefer, the journalism part or the book writing, or do you have a preference?
I am much more skilled at being a reporter than I am at being a novelist. It's all new. It's quite the challenge. It seems like it's easier, maybe not, but it seems like it's easier for me to get published by a publication as a known entity. And it took me a very long time to get published professionally, as I sought to be for this book. And it's hard to market. I don't have to deal with the marketing much when I write a story, when I freelance I'm now a freelancer for 2 publications, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Medscape WebMD, where I used to be an editor. I was an editor of Medscape. So up until about a year or so ago. So they do the marketing for the most part. I don't have to do that part. So this is me, grassroots, trying to get the message out and being my own PR agent and pursuing marketing opportunities, such as being on your podcast.
And I love that. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. So, your book, Hands of Gold, it's inspired by your grandfather's life story. What was the moment that made you realize his story needed to be told?
So at first I wrote a column for a paper that I was writing for at the time, a specialty publication, a Jewish publication. And it was the title was something like Leaving Your Legacy Behind to Your Family, Giving Memories a Voice. That's what it was, Giving Memories a Voice, Leaving Your Legacy Behind. So I initially just used it as an opportunity to talk about how my grandfather left cassette tapes of his life and how that's so important to preserve family history. But I put it aside. I really didn't know that there was a novel inside of me. I thought that was the end of it. But I think in the back of my mind, and as I further transcribed the cassette tapes and listened to what he was telling me through these cassette tapes or telling the family, I realized there were a few things that were like very dramatic. They died. My grandparents died on the same exact date of each other, a year apart. I thought that was super romantic and shows the strength of a marriage, that one couldn't live without the other. And when the year of the anniversary came of my grandmother's passing, my grandfather left this earth too. And I thought that was just beautiful. They lost most of their family in the Holocaust. That's traumatic. That's maybe been written about before. This was a different perspective, thinking about having left Europe before this all happened, what kind of guilt there was with that. My grandfather was a clinical trial patient for streptomycin, which, as it turns out, is still used today to treat tuberculosis. He was told he was terminal with tuberculosis at 26, but he lived till 86. And just going through history, going through the Great Depression, having his wife have to support their 5 children. They had children along the way of him suffering in and out of rehabilitation with tuberculosis, which is the largest infectious disease killer in the world still. So there was an influence on history and a perspective on history that I thought others would relate to and could learn from. If this man went through what he went through, why do we complain about what we go through, and how history repeats itself in so many different ways?
Sadly.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, yeah. They came here before the Holocaust actually happened? Did they
Yes.
before then? Thank God. But like you say, there was grief or at least guilt, I should say, that they had lost so many people, even though that they had escaped. And was I lucky enough to be here and they weren't?
Exactly. And most of their family died there. My grandfather had 11 siblings, and the majority of them and his parents were taken in the Holocaust. So they had come here, saw that it wasn't Jewish enough. The life was not what they wanted. They went back and thought that everything was going to be okay and people would ignore this crazy person, but they did not. So Hitler. So I think they thought it was better than it was, and then it was too late to get out. And so that guilt that you talk about.
Yeah. Especially when you're dealing about family like that. It's just got to be awful, gut-wrenching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you think, because when you write a book like this, historical fiction, it's can be both rewarding, but also, challenging. You talked about it being challenging. What do you think is the most difficult part of bringing a story like this to life?
As a journalist, the hardest part for me was the dialogue, what people would have said to each other at the time, what my grandparents might have been saying to each other, what the thought bubble was in their brain as I was having them move through their story. So while I did have the cassette tapes as a basic interview, I really had to make up so much. And because the dialogue was important to have the characters talk to each other, and it was fiction. It wasn't just history lesson. It was, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. It was interaction and family life and experiences. And I just had to create from nothing, and making up comments is difficult for somebody who's used to depending on comments. So that was the challenge.
So how do you do that? How do you balance, historical accuracy with the creative liberties you needed to have to make it a compelling read?
So I played with the facts. That's what I did. I played with them. So just to give you an example, my grandfather was in a workplace shooting spree, and there was an article in the New York Daily News about this shooting spree. It was at a rehabilitation center, and my grandfather was the supervisor. So he talked to the gunman. It's quoted as him talking to the gunman. I can lift that. It's from an article. He was quoted as saying that. Nobody cares that I lift it. They're not going to look back at 1958 article, and it's pulling from history at that point. But I felt comfortable using that, and I played with the facts. So the facts were that he talked to the gunman. In my story, he wrestled the gunman to the ground and saved everyone. There was one person who died. It's the same in my novel, but it's more dramatic. So I could be more dramatic. In straight news stories for newspapers and magazines, you don't want to do that. That used to be what we called fake news. And you could get in a lot of trouble from not being, that's the ethics of journalism, is being credible. And this way I could take some liberties with the information and play with the facts. And it's fiction. I've labeled it as fiction. I'm allowed some liberties. It's not exactly as it happened, and that's okay. So there were a lot of incidents like that where I played with the numbers, played with the facts, and made things much more dramatic. I couldn't do that in a newspaper article, or I'd get fired.
Yeah. So this shooting spree happened here in the States.
Yes, in New York.
And
Yes.
it just seems to me like it's something we think about. We hear about it almost every day on the news. You don't think of it in the 1950s of this kind of stuff, you know?
Everything happened. Everything that's happening now seems to have happened then. Maybe we are in war, but maybe it's not to the extent that it was back then. We would hope that we've made some progress in the world, but TB is still in the news today. There are wars raging in Russia and in Israel. What's going on in Israel has been compared to a Holocaust. There's hatred in the world, and we're still dealing with some of the issues that they had to deal with. And I'm not trying to be a downer about it. I'm trying to show that we too can go through and survive, come out on the other side, and have a decent life. And for him, it was just to create a decent life for his family, which he ended up doing. So I think we have to find, as the subtitle is, the silver lining in misfortune.
Yeah, and the book is a lot about resilience, escaping
Mm-hmm.
war, surviving illness, and building a new life. What kind of lessons about perseverance did you or could the reader even take away from this book?
Well, my grandfather was told he was terminal with a disease, a fatal disease. Potentially it could take his life at any moment. And yet he stood up to a gunman, which is true. And he talked to the gunman. I don't think many of us are that brave, but maybe because he was given a life sentence and he's happy to be alive, he didn't mind taking a chance. But the life lesson is, you can lose all your family. You can lose, they lost a grown son to leukemia. He was involved in a workplace shooting. He accidentally killed somebody, which plays on the facts. And yet he had a beautiful love story for 65 years with his wife, and he raised 5 children, despite one of them not making it all the way through. He had grandchildren in the end. So he wanted to be able to practice his religion in peace. He was trying to escape from that in Europe. He was trying to escape from being transcripted into the army. He was never transcripted into the army. So in a lot of ways, he achieved some of the goals that he set for himself when he left from Europe. And I paint the picture of what he experienced then and what he ended up with at the end. So I think we complain a bit and don't think we can handle all that's thrown at us. But this book shows that you can, and you can feel good about that. You don't have to go through some of the challenges that they had to go through. They paved the way for us to have an easier life in many ways.
Do you think we're heading in the wrong direction?
I think overall we've made a lot of progress since back in those days in terms of medicine. I can't speak for this particular moment right now. There is existing in the world some terrible evil and hatred that doesn't seem to go away. But overall, I think we've made a lot of progress. People mostly are doing okay. And maybe I've got blinders on, but in that medicine has come a long way, and that we know how to negotiate better maybe and see the writing on the wall when things aren't right and try to make right of wrong. I think that we moving in the wrong direction in some areas, and hopefully we'll see ourselves back to the good in the world for the most part.
I hope so. I was talking to someone recently, and he said something about, it was similar to this, where people talking about how they either had a bad day or their life was tough or their life was bad. And he said, I like to think of it that I had a great life with some bad moments. And when you look at it over the scope of all of the years, like you're saying, we did make some progress. And sometimes it's a couple of steps back, a few more steps forward, but in the grand scheme of things, we're in a different place. Hopefully it'll continue on at some point,
So it took me 20 years to get this book published. So I think that I've also had quite the struggle from start to finish, 20 years in and out of trying to get it published. I feel like that I've also gone on my journey, and I could have stopped at any point. I could have said, nope, too much, too many rejections. I got like 50 rejections. I would have thought there were 200 until I counted them. But you can talk yourself out of everything. I had cold feet. I caused some issues where I lost my first publisher because of my cold feet and concern about a family member suing me. I think you can let obstacles get in your way, but this book shows that try not to do that. Don't let it stop you. Keep going. Keep moving forward.
Yeah. Has your own connection to your heritage influenced your storytelling? I'm sure it has to have had some degree.
I'm pretty involved in my Jewish culture. I was a reporter and then an editor at a Jewish publication. I've written for Jewish publications. I've also written for traditional news publications. I wrote for the New York Daily News, and my grandfather was in that. You talk about, kismet and irony of our lives, how things work out for us. But I feel like that I have, used all my skills, and I have gotten to a point where I feel confident about my career. And again, the Judaism is a sort of a sideline. I'm very involved in my Jewish community. I'm very involved. I've always been a leader in the Jewish community. I'm the usher at my synagogue now, but I was a leader of my youth group. I was both the editor of the school newspaper and the head of the Jewish group on my college campus. So there were two paths for me. One, my Judaism, which has always been important to me, and one, my career. So both moving together.
Were there any moments, do you think, while you wrote the novel that the weight of your grandfather's story felt overwhelming at all?
I didn't let it. I think that may be the journalist in me, is that you sort of separate yourself from the facts, separate yourself from the emotion. I will say that if I made myself cry, I knew that was going to be a powerful connection or I hoped it would be a powerful connection between the story and the reader, that they should feel that too. So I wanted to laugh and cry and feel victorious so that the reader also would have those sensations, or that I hope that the readers would feel the same way that I did. So yeah, I was upset. Then then I worked that into the drama and the storytelling. And I will say that people will tell me, I was a mess at the end. I was sobbing hysterically. And I always felt like when you watch a really good movie and it really gets you choked up, that was a really good movie. Not that you want to make people cry or get choked up and not be able to breathe, but you've connected with your audience. And I was seeking that. So yeah, it was sad, but I tried as much as I could to not let it stop me. It didn't stop me. I did not stop. I just kept plugging along and working, trying to get to the finish line and get to some kind of achievement with this book, which I think in small ways I have gotten to that point.
And clearly, the whole point is you want to hit them in the heart. You want to reach them, and you did. What happened to him, it was certainly, it's no Broadway musical. You know what I mean? You got to go up and kind of, and let people really understand what really, even though it's historical fiction, I mean, it's the emotions. You've got to understand the emotions behind it. I remember being in Amsterdam back in, I don't know, it's been a while now, but visiting the Anne Frank house and a few other places of significance in and around that area. And it's very moving. And I don't know if you've been there at all, but it's very, very moving and emotional. And when you go into the house and you go up into the attic, you go behind that bookcase and you go up to the attic, they have the original wallpaper and they put plastic. So, you can't, it'll preserve it, but you can see all the original handwriting and things that they would write on the wall and little dates to let them know. And to think that all of this happened right there, I don't know how it can't move you, and I'm sure that's what people will take away from that, be able to understand it.
I almost don't want to see that, because that to me is more powerful and concrete than what went on there, what went on to people whose lives were ripped from them, even at a young age. I don't think I want to see any of that. I can write about it. It's a different sensation to write about it. I would feel more connected with having visited there. I think what's going on in Israel touches Jewish people in a really strong way, probably on the other side too. But, there but for the grace of God go I, for this experience. So I personally don't want to see any of the Holocaust. That I don't want to see what's left.
Yeah, I get it.
That's where I draw the line.
I get it. And you have that connection to
Personally.
it. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Were there any aha moments or surprising details about your grandfather's life that you didn't know before you started?
They didn't talk about the Holocaust. So that much of this was something that I had to research. They kept a lot of that from us. I didn't know. I had been told that my grandfather was sick, but I always saw him as the person who had the strength, and my grandmother was the one who seemed to be lumbering and had legs. She had some circulation issues that prevented her from walking well, and she seemed to complain a little bit about that. And he seemed to be the strong one and the healthy one. But I had been told that he had been sick, and I had told about streptomycin, I didn't know anything about that. I had to do my own research to even figure out what that was all about. I didn't realize he played such a big part of history. And I only found out recently that streptomycin is still used today. I confirmed it. I did know that, but from my research, but I interviewed a doctor or two about TB that's still in the news. And they said, yeah, it was a game changer back then. And it paved the way for the medicines that are used today for TB. And also it's still in use, but there's much better medicines. So my grandfather was in on that ground level of changing and improving medicine. So I didn't know that part. I didn't know. I didn't really make any of these connections. These were my grandparents. Okay, maybe they had some interesting things that happened in their background, I really didn't look into it that deeply. And this book really opened my mind about all of it, all of it. And I'm having a hard time also separating what I created and what really happened, but much of it was based on history and based on facts. So most of it was enlightening to me, other than what I knew about them. I knew that my grandmother was going through these issues. I knew that they died on the same day as each other, a year apart. I just didn't pay that much attention to it. I sort of noted it, but I didn't really, I just didn't really recognize it or maybe even care when you're young about, about your grandparents, other than they're your grandparents. So I think secretly I was fascinated by their hands, which I used as the title of the book. I was my grandfather's hands specifically. I knew some of the facts. They were tailors. I knew that. But the rest of it, I found out on my own, which is typical. I always say I went into journalism because my mom didn't, my parents kept things from me too. And so if I wanted to learn anything beyond what I learned in school, I'd have to look it up and research it myself. So journalists learn a little bit about a lot of subjects. And I feel like maybe that was why I ended up being a journalist, just to know what I didn't know, what I wasn't told.
Right. And, I would imagine too, I mean, I don't know. I think too, when you do a project like this and then you learn so much about grandparents that you already love, you must walk away with a whole new perspective and an even deeper pride and esteem for them than you had even before you started, I would think.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. You value your own parents for their stories. You want your own family to read what you've created and learn about themselves. I think we learn a lot about ourselves from those who went before us, what their character traits are that are similar to your character traits. So they really were very influential. And I think anyone who's blessed to spend time with their grandparents may not appreciate that at the time, but hopefully later on they will see all that they passed along. Culture, for me, culture, music, religion, resourcefulness, and using my hands in a way, because they use their hands to create things. My father used his hands to create. I think many of us use our hands to create our livelihood, and that's what Hands of Gold is partly about too.
Fantastic. Wonderful. If you could sit down with your grandfather today and tell him about the book, what would you say?
Sorry, I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance to. I wish you would have told me these stories not after you were gone. How in the world did you deal with all of that? I don't know. I don't have that kind of strength. I don't believe. I crumble when one little thing goes wrong and sets my world off, and I have to sort of backpedal and tackle it. So, what is the secret? What is the secret to it all, to getting through, to surviving and losing so much, and yet being so appreciative of the little things in life, family and religion and freedom?
So now that the book is out, do you see yourself writing another novel? Are there any other stories that you feel called to share?
Yes. So I started writing my dad's story a bit. He passed in the past year, March. So it's coming up on that anniversary. And in this year period, I've been in mourning every day. People say that, but in the Jewish culture, there is a way to go to synagogue every day or to be part of a group that allows you to say specific morning prayers. And I've been doing that for the past year. It actually, in that my grandparents died on the same date as each other, the end of my mourning period was on my mom's birthday, which again, irony, just weird stuff, connections. But my dad, it was a blacksmith, a Jewish blacksmith, starting out in a very rare, it's probably rarer to be Jewish in a blacksmith. They exist. But it's rare to say your father's a blacksmith. And then you have to explain he made things out of metal. And so he was an interesting character too. So he's my next subject. I don't know whether he would have been happy about it, that I'm doing this. He had a lot of attention placed on him, and I thought that he liked that. So he was written up in the newspaper, different newspapers and publications about this sort of dying trade that he made into a international business. Started out in our garage on Long Island and then now is in North Carolina. My brother is running the business. So the blacksmith's Kane and the Blacksmith's Depot. So Kane and Son. So they are in Asheville, North Carolina, and they've gone through their own challenges there, as you probably have heard, with the flooding, and they managed to survive that too. But my dad was an interesting character. So A Mighty Arm is, I just started it and ended it, which is how I think the most powerful parts of a book are the beginning and the ending, and then filling in the details along the way. He also was an engineer and trained Apollo space mission astronauts. So he was in the Navy and got injured. And so there's a lot of twists and turns in his life too. So it takes you through the life of somebody he was an interesting character. He didn't really get along with people as much as pets. And, he was a definite engineer type, but very brilliant and made some differences in the world in his own little way, in inspiring others and just taking a business from a garage to an internationally known entity and that others can turn to. And he taught people along the way. So we'll see what happens. A Mighty Arm.
There you go. That's great. What would you like to share about, the book, or how people can hear about you, and where can they get the book? I guess that's important too.
So it's on Amazon and everywhere that books are sold. So Barnes and Noble and Books A Million, Target, Walmart, Goodreads. So every place you would buy books, mostly online, in some bookstores. It's in the library, some libraries in New York and other places. You can find out all about that either through my website, www.ronirobbins.com. You have to spell my name right, RoniRobbins, or social media. You can Google me and find me. I'm on Facebook and X and LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok even. So hopefully you can find me either Roni Robbins, Roni Kane Robbins, which is my maiden name, Kayne, or Hands of Gold. Mostly Roni Robbins though, or look up Hands of Gold, but you should be able to find me. So I love hearing from readers, and I should also add that the book won, like you talked about, it won 6 awards. You mentioned 2 of them in 2023. It won an award last year, 2024 finalists for American Legacy Book Awards and American Fiction Awards. It was a finalist for. So it's in the U.S. Holocaust Museum gift shop. It's been written about in the Jerusalem Post and also Washington Jewish Week and other publications, all on my website, along with the podcast that I've been honored to be a guest of, and where I'm going to be speaking next. I have speaking engagements and talk to book clubs and other groups. So you can find that all online on my website.
Thank you so much, Roni. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you being here with me today.
Thank you.
Your writing is a gift to readers everywhere. Hands of Gold is more than just a novel. It's a testament to resilience, survival, and the enduring power of storytelling. And to everyone listening, if you love stories that weave history, family, and personal legacy into a gripping narrative, I highly recommend picking up Hands of Gold. You can learn more about Roni's work, her writing journey, and where to get the book by visiting her website, again, at www.ronirobbins.com. And I'm going to put that in the comments section of wherever you're watching or listening to this, I should say, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever, so you can find it. You don't have to remember how to spell it. It'll be right there for you. And while you're online, don't forget to stop by my website at www.mediumscottallen.com. Here you can sign up for my newsletter, schedule a private reading, and find out where you can attend one of my live shows. I'm also excited to share that I'll be hosting a 7-day metaphysical cruise to the Eastern Caribbean through Sunbird Travel in Naples, Florida. We'll sail out of Miami on December 7th, 2025 on the beautiful Carnival celebration. Come along and you'll get a complimentary reading with me, plus a ticket to my mediumship event at sea, and so much more. For more information, check out my website as well. I'd love to connect with you personally and support you on your path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue these powerful conversations. Thank you, Roni, for sharing your time, your insights, and your incredible storytelling with us today. And to all of you tuning in, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep embracing the stories that connect us all. Until next time, go out there and enjoy your best enlightened life.